on the Sports Social Podcast Network.
The Super League season is well underway, and you can follow every kick, pass, try and even red card on the road to Old Trafford and beyond on the 4020 Rugby League podcast. I'm Richard Shorey, joined every week by Phil Kaplan of 4020 magazine and former Super League match official James Child, along with special guests to discuss everything on and off the pitch. To find us, just search for 4020 Rugby League podcast on your podcast provider of choice.
Manchester's indie rock and roll station, XS Manchester.
The XS Manchester long player, an iconic album in full with Jim Salverson.
XS Manchester.
Hello and welcome back to the XS Manchester long player. I say welcome back, this could well be your first time listening to this podcast, and if it is, well, aren't you in for a treat? This is the 49th episode of the XS Long Player, meaning there are 48 other albums you can get stuck into and hear the stories about their creation of... That was a weird sentence. Hear the stories about how they were made. Kind of works better. Either way, you can hear all about those albums by delving into the back catalogue. Albums like Cooler Shaker K, Doves, The Last Broadcast... The Music's debut album, which is one of my favourite episodes we've done of this, which may not be an album you're massively familiar with, but it's a great episode. That's just three off the top of my head. Have a look into the back catalogue. But today, it's all about Gomez, and it's all about the album Bring It On, the band's debut, and a Mercury Music Prize winning album that beat the Verve Urban Hymns and Massive Attack Mezzanine to that title. And that was just one part of an incredible first 12 months for the band, where they were just caught up in this whirlwind. And they were absolutely massive in 1998 over that period as well. We'll get into that shortly with Ben Ottewell from the band. He is talking us through tonight's XS Long Player album, so let's get stuck into it. Gomez, Bring It On the XS Long Player.
Hi, how are you?
Yeah, I'm really good. So we're talking about Gomez, Bring It On. 25th anniversary last year. You toured the album in full for the 20th anniversary as well. So it's not an album that you haven't revisited a few times down the line.
Yeah, I did some solo shows as well, which were just me playing the entire record, which was interesting, to say the least.
So you're familiar with it. You remember it, which is a good place to start.
Yeah, sort of. I didn't really... Yeah, when it came to try and play songs like Reeves Wagon and Bubblegum Years, I had a bit of difficulty. But yeah, I made a point of not listening to it and just trying to sort of, try and come up with different ways of doing it. But yes, I am familiar with the work. Yes. When
you do listen to it, or when you do kind of try and reshape those songs so they work on a solo basis, do you still, despite the fact you've lived with this album for 25 years, do you still find new things about the songs? Do you hear something different every time you do listen back?
Yeah, I mean, there's certain things, like there's certain kind of, I don't know, it's hard to explain. I mean, a lot of the time I'd be playing sort of a different instrument on these things, so like lead guitar or something, or just singing them. And so playing them, you're sort of thinking, how on earth, as stoned and as we were, did we come up with, some of the chord changes are really quite good. Which thought, they were like quite sort of basic, but it's quite sort of proud of it, actually.
Well, it's a hugely accomplished record for what is a bunch of 17 and 18-year-olds kind of, I guess, finding their feet in music to a certain extent. When you listen to these songs, does it take you back to that point where you're in a garage in Southport making these tunes, or have they been too constant in your life to kind of take you back to a specific point, a specific time and place?
I suppose it does a little bit. It was, obviously, it's a long time ago. I have a terrible memory. But it was just how... I just remember how much fun it was, basically. And that was... Because I sort of joined the band a bit later, and the other guys have been making music for a while, and I just couldn't believe there was a bunch of like-minded people who really sort of didn't care about, what form the music took or genres or anything. We just wanted to make good music, but also kind of explore it. And I think one of the main things for us was we weren't interested in being sort of famous touring musicians. We never played a gig before we got signed. We never sort of, so it was, I think that just sort of abandon was what was so fun about it. And I kind of remember that. I remember it being really freeing and just really good fun.
What were you guys listening to at the time? Because it's this really eclectic album. It's very bluesy. There's a bit of roots in there. There's a touch of indie, although you were kind of lumped in with the indie Britpop thing. I think there's very little that connects you to that scene.
Yeah.
What were you guys listening to that was inspiring this album?
think with the Britpop thing, actually, there is sort of a line. I mean, the songwriting, some of the songwriting in the Britpop stuff was excellent. And I think, we sort of latched onto that. Tom had been more into sort of the Pixies and stuff like that, and Al was deeply into like kind of Massive Attack and a lot of that sort, more sort of Bristol stuff and more electronic stuff. And I'd be listening to blues records and Tom Waits, and would all like a bit of Nick Drake. I mean, literally everything. I mean, at the time as well, it was sort of it was sort of the time when every CD got reissued at the same time as though it was a new release, and it kind of felt like that in a lot of ways. Like we'd be searching for sort of obscure records, and it all just seemed to come out, sort of around the mid-90s. And so sort of for the first time, everyone had access to most stuff, which was great, and so a lot of those sort of Tom Waits records and Tim Buckley records and sort of came to us as new. It was a good time to be making music.
Do you think part of the success of the album was that it had these different influences feeding into it, and that by the time 98 rolled around, Britpop was kind of on the wane a little bit. It was dying away, and there was a hunger for something that sounded a little bit different, and Bring It On offered that to a certain extent.
I mean, I guess so. I get, it wasn't really in our heads, but I guess that was part of the reason why, and it's also fun, and there was none of that kind of, I mean, we're called Gomez, you can't sort of really take yourself that seriously if you call Gomez. It kind of helped us, I think, in a way. But yeah, I think that was definitely, and I think it maybe, people having suddenly, sort of sociologically, suddenly having access to all this music, they're probably hearing that reflected back in what we were doing in a way, You mentioned previously the success you had, the early success, one gig, and then you've signed a record deal, but that was only a very small part of it. You had the album come out pretty soon after signing the deal, and then that won the Mercury Music Prize, beating off some fairly sizable competition in doing so within 12 months. I think you headlined Glastonbury, is that right? Did you headline it, or were you high up the bill? It was one of the... I think it was 99 we were on the other stage, headlining the other stage, which was crazy.
I was going to say, did it feel as crazy at the time as it does when you look back at that and look at that phenomenal success over that 12-month period?
It sort of did, but at the time we were sort of on a roller coaster, so we really wanted to go and play in the States. That was a big deal. So pretty much as soon as we'd won the Mercury Prize, we were off to the States. So a lot of the attention that would have been garnered from winning the Mercury Prize, we sort of missed because no one really cared about that in the States, So we just went and played loads of little clubs in the States, but it was just, then it was, came back, played the UK, played, the crowds just kept getting bigger and bigger, and it was just, there was no stopping. We went to Australia, so it was kind of overwhelming. I'm a little bit surprised we didn't burn out, to be honest, because we were sort of chucked into it. We were pretty young, pretty green, didn't really have any idea what we were doing.
Did it feel like that you could have benefited from more of a chance to work out how this stuff worked and kind of feel your way into the music industry, particularly given what you say about how you started out? You had no ambitions for being rich, famous musicians. You wanted to just mess around and make music.
Yeah, I mean, the rich bit, maybe. but yeah, I mean, there wasn't any, I mean, luckily we did, our manager was, had been a musician in the 80s, well, he was a musician, but he'd been in a band in the 80s, so he gave us a lot of advice and kind of looked after us, But yeah, it was pretty, there was no sort of rule book. And it is crazy. You sort of expected to, do things in excess and, and yeah, I'm surprised that we sort of got through it unscathed, and a lot of people didn't. And I guess because there was no sort of lead singer, or sort of focal point for the band. I think that probably helped us a little bit.
How did you stop yourselves getting carried away? Because there would have been a moment at the Mercury Music Prizes where they're reading out the nominees and you've got Massive Attack in there, you've got the Verve Urban Hymns in there. I think they were the favourites at the time. And suddenly on stage, it gets announced that the best album, the most creative album of the last 12 months is Gomez, Bring It On. How do you stop yourself getting carried away? Or did you not stop yourselves getting carried away?
I think we just took the piss out of each other relentlessly, and I think that was pretty much how we got through, with humour and yeah, just friendship. We were all mates, and we were all sort of doing it together, and it was great. But I think otherwise it would have been tricky.
I want to talk about a couple of key moments off the album for me. I've picked a couple of my personal highlights, if that's okay. I'd like you to pick one in a moment, or two if you want. Just a moment from the album. It could be a highlight or a low light. It could be a favourite bit musically or a story that's connected to a song, whatever you like. So whilst I give you a chance to think about that, I wanted to talk about two particular tracks. First off, the iconic Whipping Piccadilly.
Yeah.
And in particular, my favourite moment from any song in history ever, which is the iconic what bit. What is it, and how is that new song made? How is that noise made?
I think it's, as I remember, I think it's just sort of it's like a broken drum machine, basically, just done an arpeggio sort of thing. Yeah, I can't quite remember, but it was something. I mean, it's definitely something that's not particularly high tech and a little bit broken. That was sort of where we went a lot of the time. But yeah, it's great.
It's an amazing moment. It's like, it's one of those things. It feels like it's the kind of thing that would only ever happen by accident. So maybe that's why.
Yeah, I think possibly it did. I can't remember. But what's great is it kind of precedes what's essentially just a Chuck Berry song. You know, so it's a nice bit of juxtaposition.
It's obviously a song that's written about this city as well. We're here in Manchester.
Yeah.
It's written about a day in Manchester with your mates. And I understand that the character who is dressed in a suit and looking like a lunatic is actually Beck. Is that right?
Yeah, it's Beck. Yeah, I wasn't actually on this trip, but a lot of they all went to see Beck in Manchester from Sheffield and got the train home that night. And the Whipping Piccadilly is our friend Mark Sims, who was very drunk and while waiting for the train decided to take his belt off and start whipping the platform with his belt.
Like you do.
I think he was getting a little impatient. The guy's now working in Northern California as some sort of physicist. So that's strange.
Well, how strange our life turns out.
Yeah.
The second song I wanted to talk about was 78 Stone Wobble. And again, it's a little effect, and it's the effect on the vocal that you have at the beginning of that song. Now, in my head for this, you guys are using some kind of maybe cheap kid's toy to do that vocal. And I think nowadays, if you fast forward to 2024, if that was being on a modern record, there'd be a producer painting over Pro Tools plugins and all this stuff to make it sound right and feel right. But I get the sense that the way this record came together was far more organic. So do you remember how that came about?
Yeah, I think initially we actually used a telephone and managed to ram sort of a telephone into it, like a speaker on a telephone, you know. But then we may have used also a harmonica mic, you know, those harmonica mics that you sort of hold, and they often have that effect as well. But yeah, it was one or the other. I'm not sure. It's a while ago.
The two things you described there, it feels like it's just a load of mates getting together and trying stuff out and just kind of having fun and making music. Yeah. Does that sum up the record as a whole?
Yeah, basically. I mean, that's what it was all about. It was about sort of trying to combine these textures and where we were all coming from and just make something we could all... Because it's tough in a band, particularly when it has become tougher, I suppose, but when you've got, you know, 5 such sort of strongly creative people and they all want to get involved, you know, and be creative. Not ego-driven, but they all want the sort of bit in it. And yeah, it's tough sometimes just to get something you're all happy with, you know. So... But it was a lot of fun. It was a lot of fun.
Okay, so they're a couple of my highlights from the album. If you were pressed to pick a personal highlight, what would you be going for?
I really lyrically it's not great, but Here Comes the Breeze, just because that sort of second bit of the song where it kind of breaks down to there's like a sort of guitar riff and a bass line. That was the first time we all ever sort of played together. That little section came from there. And how we managed to kind of tag it onto to the end of you sort of got a song and you've got an outro and then you've got a middle bit and an outro and it's sort of veers wildly from place to place. And that was really interesting to me because I'd not worked with the guys before that, you know, we could sort of come up with a little riff that was effectively just jamming to, you know, after the pub. And then, you know, Ian just got the recorder out and was like, all right, let's get a bit of that. And then, you know, and I was like, well, I've got this song. And that was the first sort of instance when I was like, oh, look at what we can do. Look at the possibilities. So I think that's my favourite bit.
Speaking of firsts, do you remember what was the very first song on the album that got completed, either when you went to the studios or in that early demo form?
So they had a few of them sort of before I joined, but like in demo form. And I think what would be the first? But actually, maybe Get Myself Arrested. I think they had that, but then I sort of put the guitar in it and the harmonies and stuff like that. So that might have been the first one, but I'm not entirely sure. I mean, Get Miles was the first thing I recorded with them.
I wanted to speak about Get Miles in a moment, actually, because I think Gomez are incredibly unique because you've got this thing where the three of you share vocals.
Yeah.
Does that change the ownership that you feel towards each song? If you are singing it, no matter what's gone into the writing or the creation process, does that kind of become your song and vice versa?
I think it has to sing it convincingly, if that's what's required, which certainly a lot of, like what I sing, you sort of have to be fairly committed to it. Otherwise people are going to tell. People can tell, So yeah, I think, but I mean, only in so much that, you have to convince yourself, I guess in a way as well. So yeah, but I mean, Get Miles, like I wrote the verses, Ian wrote the choruses, and most of the songs are that way. Very rarely is there a song that's completely sort of written by one of us, it's in its entirety.
With Get Miles, obviously, that grants you the first words on the album, and that's a pretty big deal, I think. So the first vocals on any band's debut album is fair milestone to pass. How much of a conversation, how much of an argument was there over who got that honour?
None at all, because it was that song. I mean, I don't think it's very hard to find a better opening song, certainly on one of our records, just with the keytar, and a blues riff. It's a great intro, and it was always going to start the record, that song.
I want to finish, Ben, on a quote from The NME on the review of this album when it came out, from a journalist called Steve Sutherland, and I want to know whether you agree with how he describes Bring It On. He describes it as one of the most assured, poised, hilarious, out there, plain, don't give a fuck enjoyable debut albums in living memory. Are you on board with that assessment?
Yeah, perhaps apart from the poised bit, but yeah. Yeah, I think we had a lot to learn, but yeah, it was good, and it was a lot of fun to make, and it was it's become really important to a lot of people, so yeah. And
that's exactly why it's been an absolute pleasure to talk to you about it on the XS Long Player. So Ben, thank you very much for your time.
No worries, mate. Thanks for having me.
The XS Manchester Long Player, an iconic album in full with Jim Salverson.
XS Manchester.
Nice one. Cheers for your ears. Thanks to Ben. What a gentleman. What a lovely man to talk to. And the amount of times he kind of went, I don't remember, it was long ago, we were having fun. I kind of lost count, and I love that. It just sums up how the band must have been feeling at that time. If you want more of these episodes, get stuck into the back catalogue. Loads of brilliant albums, as I talked about earlier, getting discussed by people who made them. Even if you've not heard of the album, even if it's not one of your favourites, listen to the episode, because there will be some amazing stories that you won't have heard before. So go and listen to that, and I'll see you next time on the XS Long Player.
The XS Manchester Long Player, an iconic album in full with Jim Salverson.
XS Manchester.